Meaning in the arts. What does it mean to mean? We often speak of meaningful work, meaningful relationships, and meaningful action. We often speak of living a meaningful life and of the things we do that give our lives meaning. In those moments during which we question our careers, question our relationships with people, or question our faith, the issue at stake very often tends to be one of meaning. Though the question of defining meaning may seem daunting at first, I think that for the purposes of this discussion, it is practical to define meaning as simply the association of one form with another form. That's all, you may ask. Yet think about it. Whether we are asking what a certain emoticon means, or we ask what our lives mean within the vast cosmos, we are asking questions about the relationships between forms. Images, sounds, shapes, colors, and ideas, for example, all have a form to them. It is this sense of the word meaning which I use repeatedly in this discussion. In my own life, I am often asked the question of what gives me a sense of meaning in my life. For sure, as many of you probably do, I find meaning in the time I spend with loved ones, in the satisfaction of work well done, and in the enjoyment of natural beauty and well-balanced physical activity. Yet, beneath all of these things, in those moments when I am alone, my most urgent work having been completed, and the weather suitable neither for outdoor activity nor sightseeing, I find myself inordinately preoccupied with art. Being a music composer, it is perhaps inevitable that I should spend a certain amount of time each day thinking about the construction of music. The appeal of art to me as a vehicle for meaning, however, goes well beyond that medium. A quote attributed to Pablo Picasso sums up this appeal rather succinctly. The quote states that art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. This, upon first glance, admittedly seems self-contradictory. How can a lie lead us to truth? But let us re-examine this once more. Art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. What is the lie here? The most direct answer would seem to be that art very often evokes something without literally being that thing. A statue of a person is not really a person. It is a piece of marble or bronze, etc., in human form. An actor playing a character is not really that character, but a person who has studied the techniques of impersonation as an art form. And hot dogs are not really made out of dog meat, as far as I can tell. They are a casing filled with a variety of possible meat-based, or these days also meatless, fillings. All of these things are, in some way, an expression of art, and all of them involve some playful use of illusion or referencing for expressive purposes. And yet, these things have the potential to enhance our experience and understanding of the world in some unpredictable ways. As we've heard before, art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. The key word here is enables. Art has the capacity to give us new abilities of perception and understanding. Furthermore, what we have here is the observation that our quest for understanding may take us down some rather circuitous paths. We know this intuitively, in a sense. We know, for example, that the journey to the sea may take us through a desert. We know that the journey to the mountains may take us across the plains. When we know this, though, it's usually because we've seen a map of the place, Or perhaps we already know the lay of the land from experience. But the journey into the future is always obscure. And the things we understand today sometimes still leave us unprepared for what we will face tomorrow. The things we now take for granted as truth were probably not always so. If your past self were to encounter you as you are today, that person may not believe everything you had to tell them. Anything, after all, can appear to be a lie when it fails to conform to truth as we understand it, right in the immediate moment. And yet, when a piece of art awakens some previously unexplored part of ourselves, it has the ability to ignite within us a new intelligence we never realized we had. I do not mean intelligence in the sense of a grade or a numerical score, like you might receive in a classroom or on a standardized test, although sadly the necessity of quick and easy grading has rendered this the most common depiction of what intelligence is. I mean intelligence in the original sense of its Latin roots, interlego, or literally putting together. The ability to make connections and see new relationships among the things we observe. Art, in its most basic sense, is the act of a human being simply playing with forms of color, taste, sound, motion, space, etc. Exploring new combinations of forms that have the ability to excite our untapped capacity for intelligence. Intelligence in the Latin sense is, after all about the ability of our minds to see relationships between forms. What sound does the letter P make? How much longer should I bake these cookies? Is it a good idea to wear this jacket to Sunday brunch? Is my daughter old enough to walk to school alone? All of these questions rely on our intelligence, and all of them test our understanding of relationships between forms, shapes, colors, sounds, words, textures, abstract constructs like right and wrong, and the familiar forms of the people we know and love. And then we have things like Van Gogh's Starry Night, or Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, or ice cream, or the tango, or Star Trek. Things that in and of themselves are not germane to the immediate needs of preserving our health, safety, or survival per se, in the way that, say, medicine, agriculture, and sanitation have become. The arts, unlike those other things, aim to glorify the senses and the imagination. Food, clothing, and shelter are essential for our physical survival. The Mona Lisa is not. And yet, the strange alchemy of the arts is that because of them, our food, our clothing, and our shelters have been transformed by culture from objects of mere utility into objects of pleasure, beauty, and personal enrichment. An artfully made sandwich and cup of coffee can therefore provide as much nourishment for our intelligence as for our body, so long as we are open to receiving what the artistry can teach us. So can a well-made jacket or a well-designed and well-built house. When we have fruitful encounters with artful things, we are transformed somehow by an awakening of new intelligence in the sense of putting together within us. Sometimes it reveals new insights about truth as we see it, even if the art would have represented a kind of lie by our old standards. Once again, art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. Yet how does art do this? To answer this question, we must return to the problem of meaning. Meaning in and of itself does not have to be such an esoteric, unreachable thing. After all, we ask questions every day relating to the basic, everyday meanings of things. What does a certain Spanish word mean in English? What does it mean when that light comes on my dashboard? Etc. All of those questions simply refer back to the old issue of relationships between forms. Baloncesto means basketball. That light means it's time for an oil change. The same can happen in art in so many ways. Sometimes it occurs through direct representation, as in Michelangelo's David. We know it is a human figure because the realism is so faithful. And we know it is David, assuming we know the biblical story, because he looks over his shoulder and holds a sling. Realistic depiction is, of course, particularly well known in the visual arts. It also occurs, however, in music, as with Rimsky-Korsakov's famous musical depiction of a bumblebee in flight. It also occurs in film acting, as with Ben Kingsley and Daniel Day-Lewis in their respective portrayals of Gandhi and Abraham Lincoln. In the case of these two actors just mentioned, the question is how to use elocution and physical bearing to realistically evoke the persona of another individual, sometimes somebody long dead. The actions of the actor thereby take on the meaning of the character. A second way the arts can convey meaning is through something less direct, a kind of abstract representation. Works of art using this kind of format may not necessarily strive to depict an external phenomenon, but simply play with form, either with the intent to please the senses or to test the limits of the medium. Examples of art following this description might include the extended harmonic progressions of a Bach prelude, or the deceptively static textures of a Jackson Pollock painting. Any precise representation of an external phenomenon, in other words, any precise meaning, therefore depends on us. It occurs in the mind of the viewer or the listener, and therefore may differ from person to person, or even moment to moment. In some cases, art can straddle the boundary between direct and abstract representation, as in Cubist painting. Picasso, for example, may juxtapose abstract shapes, squares, spheres, rectangles, and semicircles, in such a way that they somehow become a human form, without sacrificing their simultaneous identities as abstract shapes, too. Such works thereby test the limits of our perception of things as distinct phenomena. As we've heard before, art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. A third way the arts can convey meaning is through references to other pieces of art, often within the same tradition. Consider, for example, Charles Ives' variations on My Country 'Tis of Thee, or Tom Stoppard's play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which retells the story of Hamlet through the eyes of two minor characters from that story. In both of these cases, the older piece of art has taken on a new kind of cultural meaning of its own, therefore making the artwork itself ripe for reinterpretation in new derivative works of art. Often, the presentation of the new art comes with the implied presumption of familiarity with the older work of art. Some particularly noteworthy examples of this process can be usually found in the art of parody. Imagine, for example, if you tried to watch Mel Brooks's Spaceballs, having never even heard of the Star Wars franchise. Or if you tried listening to Weird Al Yankovic without any knowledge of the original songs he was parodying. Sometimes art deliberately attempts to defy convention by blending elements from different traditions. Think of fusion cuisine, for example. Fusion cuisine combines elements of cuisines that are not traditionally considered to be compatible with one another and strives to explore the possibilities of the resulting combinations of ingredients or cooking techniques. The irony, however, is that fusion cuisine ceases to be fusion once the resulting dish becomes a traditional dish in its own right, within a newly emerging tradition of cuisine. This has happened before. We often think of so-called traditional Belgian chocolate and Italian marinara sauce, unaware that just a few centuries ago, chocolate and tomatoes were exotic ingredients in European cooking, both having origins in Mexico. Hence, what were once unorthodox combinations of ingredients are now considered classic icons of traditional cuisines. This goes to show how complex the relationship can be between meaning and the arts. Art, therefore, has the power to create meaning not only through association with external phenomena, but by re-presenting those phenomena in new situations and new contexts. We see this all the time in political cartoons, which use the power of pen and ink to put familiar faces in unfamiliar visual situations, thereby making commentary through association. Other instances of artistic contextualization are less obvious and more open to ambiguity. Imagine, for example, a painting depicting Genghis Khan playing croquet with Kanye West in the arena of the Roman Colosseum. What meaning can you find in that image? Just for fun, if you can find no meaning in that image, try. You may surprise yourself with your own gift for insight. As you leave the space you are in now and venture into new places with new sights, sounds, flavors, and other sensations, continue to try. You may notice the artistry in everyday items like paper cups, road signs, bicycle wheels, and sunglasses. Notice what new meanings the juxtaposition of forms can reveal to you. You may very well be surprised by the breadth of your intelligence in the Latin sense of putting together, and what that newly awoken intelligence can then do beyond art. As we heard before, art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. If we are afraid to be transformed by the benign deceptions of art, we run the risk of falling instead into the echo chamber of orthodoxy and dogma, only willing to listen to that which we have always accepted as true. We also run the risk of having our minds become unprepared to face an unimagined future. The arts may serve as good entertainment, but they are also vital and necessary instruments for preserving the fitness of our minds to adapt to strange situations and navigate the unpredictable and chaotic world we inhabit. Some art pleases the senses. Some art expresses emotion or comments on society. Some art comments on other art. Yet in the end, the meaning of art comes to life within us. We are all on a search for meaning. Many of us have found meaning somewhere in our lives. But for those of us who struggle with the question, art can provide one pathway for encouraging the discovery of meanings in unlikely sources. And with the resulting intelligence that awakens within us, perhaps we may see the meaning in our lives we never knew was there.